I may hold Doom in such high regard with id Software, but I do have some fond memories of the Quake series. Back in middle school, I had an IT class, and at the end of each day's lesson, our teacher would let us create a local server for the computer lab and play Quake 3 Arena together. Those were some good times, and I recently bought Quake 3 Arena on PC during last week's QuakeCon 2021 sale. Oddly enough, that and all others in the series, starting with 2, were very different from Quake's origin. As a celebration for this year's QuakeCon, PCs and consoles got a remaster of that original title. Here is my review of Quake for the Nintendo Switch. The story of Quake is about a world that tampers with teleportation technology and is overrun when a strange deity codenamed Quake sends death squads into the human dimension to invade Earth. You play as Ranger, the sole survivor of the attack, and navigate dimensions to collect magic runes and find the Quake entity so you can put a stop to the invasion. As with id Software's other early titles, Quake does not have cutscenes in the traditional sense. When you finish each of the 4 episodes, you get a little text scene similar to what Doom's 1 and 2 had. It's also worth noting that the plot of Quake is standalone. Quake 2 was originally supposed to be a completely different series, and all other Quake games did a very different take on the sci-fi shooter thing. This makes Quake 1's story a bit unique, as it is more gothic and Lovecraftian in nature with magic and horrific monstrosities rather than the alien plot they used for Quake 2 and onward. When it comes to gameplay, Quake is a fast-paced, first-person shooter. As you navigate through each level, you will be navigating mazes and puzzles while shooting enemies with firearms like shotguns and grenade launchers. Now, being a remaster of the original Quake, we have some differences and enhancements. As far as content goes, we've got 5 campaigns you can go through. The original Quake campaign, pre-existing expansions, and an entirely new campaign made by Machine Games for this remaster. We will also have downloadable expansions, the first of which is Quake 64. Outside of single player, we've got multiplayer options for not only local, but the one thing the recent Doom ports did not do. The Quake remaster has completely online multiplayer with cross-play enabled, meaning that Switch players can play with PlayStation, Xbox, and PC players. We've also got restriction options if you only want to be paired with players using controllers. Other enhancements include a trophy system similar to the one Doom 64 used, motion aiming, and a completely redone soundtrack, though there are some issues with that we will talk about later. We've also got a ton of visual enhancements with the graphics as well as tweakable effects. This allows you to have the game look beautifully or lower everything down to be as choppy and blurry as the original looked, depending on what you're looking for. And before moving on to game progression, you're probably wondering if this has cheats built into it. The PC version does via console commands, but the console version doesn't. As far as game progression goes, Quake is very much like the original Doom entries, but with a hub world instead of just menus. You start each game in this hub with different hallways to go to different episodes. You're even given the power of choice, as you can tackle them in any order you wish. Once you start diving into levels, fans will find a lot of familiar things. The fast-paced run-and-gun style that Quake's later entries did not share. Lots of areas to explore in maze-like maps, puzzles to solve with colored keys, secret areas for you to find, and the classic level and reward screen to let you know how quick you cleared the level and how many enemies and secrets you may have missed. Now let's talk difficulty. Quake is a very fast and difficult shooter like the old Doom series. You will need all of that speed in sprinting, strafing, and those iconic nail and lightning guns to be able to clear even some of the lower tier enemies. The medieval knights that charge at you don't take a whole lot to take down, but if they get close, that sword will eat up your health like nobody's business. And the further you go, the trickier it will get. Not all enemy attacks can be strafed or sprinted past to dodge. One particular enemy has a homing attack that can and will follow you around indefinitely if you don't get it to run into either a pillar or you. All of this works together pretty well, and Quake will give you a good amount of content and length. The remaster costs $10 on the eShop, and the standard campaign will last you around 5 hours by itself, with the other 4 and Quake 64 adding plenty of more time on top of that. With the promise of more downloadable campaigns coming in the future, that content will only get larger. When we get to presentation, the game looks good. The visuals of the original were upscaled and the amount of graphic options is quite impressive with the flexibility. As I said earlier, you can bring settings down to make it look like the original Quake, even with the model interpolation being turned off to give the enemy renders that low-res, choppy animation they had back in the day. Though I should note that Quake 64 is pretty rough on the eyes. Not only does it look like it did way back in the day, but it has a heavy blur CRT filter on top of it. Now there are two issues with the presentation. The first is the lack of volume on the soundtrack. Quake has very ambient and atmospheric music to it, but on the Switch, you probably can't even tell there is music. The volume of the music is so quiet I couldn't hear it at all unless I cranked it all the way up in settings and put my TV's volume to really insane levels. The second issue is pretty minor with frame drops. For most of the game, Quake will stay at 60 frames per second, but some areas do drop it down. You can help this with turning off a bunch of the extra graphical settings, though even with most of them off, you will still get drops every so often. Now let's get into battery life. Quake gives the original model a range of about 4 to 5 hours, the Nintendo Switch Lite 4.5 to 5.5 hours, and the Redbox or V2 2019 model 6.5 to almost 8. In conclusion, the original Quake has come to a handheld and offers the fast-paced Doom gameplay, but with a Lovecraftian twist packed in with great new features, especially the online crossplay. Now on the downside, the music and small FPS drops will need to be tweaked later on. But anyone wanting yet another piece of first-person shooter history from id Software on the go will find a well-done port with lots of content and more on the way. Reviews to Go rates the Quake remaster for the Nintendo Switch a 9 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thank you for watching and have a great day.